Each morning, the human arrived before the station's bustle could fully awaken, slipping through the corridors with quiet determination, a small tray of carefully prepared sustenance cradled in his hands, knowing that every calorie, every nutrient, every careful measure of hydration mattered to the creature in ways the aliens could not comprehend. The creature, still trembling at the edge of awareness, would watch him from the corner of its many eyes, head cocked in a way that suggested recognition but not yet trust, limbs flexing as if to test their own strength against the pain that lingered like a shadow beneath its skin. The station's alien workers passed by, their long limbs brushing against rails and walls in habitual efficiency, their voices sharp, cutting remarks flitting across the air like shards of ice. "Still here?" one hissed, claws tapping against metal in impatience. "Wasting time on scrap?" another spat. The vibration of their words designed to unsettle, to remind the human that he too had a value measured in productivity, and that the hours he spent tending to what they called a failed specimen were hours lost, credits unearned, opportunities discarded. But the human ignored them. He knelt beside the creature, adjusting a fractured limb with hands that were steady and deliberate, feeling for tension, for discomfort, for the subtle signals that indicated pain or trust, whispering a string of sounds that rolled across the alien's consciousness like a gentle tide. Not instructions, not commands, only presence, constancy. The unspoken vow that he would not leave, that he would not measure the creature's worth, that he would honor the life in front of him simply for the sake of life itself. And over time, the creature began to respond in ways that were small but monumental. A twitch of a claw following the human's finger, a soft vibration of the throat that suggested acknowledgement, a tentative extension of a limb toward the offered tray, not from hunger alone, but from recognition that this was a being who could be trusted. The aliens watched with growing irritation, their calculations failing to account for the unseen bonds forming in silence, the whispers of patience weaving around the creature's fractured mind and stitching together fragments of fear and trauma into the beginnings of something resembling confidence. Days rolled into nights filled with quiet ritual, the human sitting cross-legged beside the creature, reading aloud stories in a voice that rose and fell like waves, describing worlds the aliens would never visit, creatures they would never encounter, and acts of courage that humans took not for profit, not for glory, but because the choice to do good, to persist, to care, was itself a mark of strength. And the creature listened. It leaned into the human's presence, sometimes resting a shattered limb across a shoulder, sometimes pressing its head into the crook of a neck, movements that no alien observer could interpret correctly, movements that carried no utility but conveyed trust, recognition, and the first threads of attachment. The station's corridors buzzed with commerce and calculation, yet in their small corner, time moved differently. Pain, which had once dominated every nerve, began to recede, replaced by tentative mobility, coordinated motion, the strange joy of muscles and joints learning function again, of limbs that had once been useless, now flexing with purpose. And through it all, the human persisted, never rushing, never forcing, never letting alien impatience dictate his actions. The aliens grew impatient. Some attempted to intervene with chemical stimulants, mechanical exosuits, or experimental enhancements, insisting that the creature could recover faster if only it were treated efficiently, rationally, scientifically. The human refused each time, a calm defiance in his eyes that spoke of conviction beyond reasoning, insisting that recovery could not be hurried, that trust could not be forced, that healing required more than the sum of algorithms and injections, that it demanded patience, empathy, and respect for the being's own choices. Weeks became months, and with every small improvement, the creature's awareness grew sharper. Eyes that had been clouded now tracked movement with precision. Limbs once twisted began to coordinate. A flicker of understanding crossed its multiple faces as it began to anticipate the human's actions, subtly mirroring his gestures, leaning toward his hand before it was extended, and pressing his head against him without hesitation. The station's aliens whispered among themselves, some in disbelief, some in fear. They had never seen a being so thoroughly dismissed rise, not through domination, not through manipulation, but through care, through constancy, through the kind of patience they had long since abandoned in favor of efficiency and profit. The human, however, never noted their surprise. His focus remained on the creature's smallest signals, the way a limb trembled before lifting fully, the flicker of recognition in an eye, the subtle softening of posture that indicated trust. And as the days stretched into weeks, trust solidified into something deeper, a bond unspoken, unquantifiable, a quiet understanding that each had earned the presence of the other, that loyalty was not owed but given freely, that connection could not be forced, sold, or taken. The aliens tried to mock it, tried to label it foolish, sentimental, inefficient, but the human ignored them, and the creature continued to respond in ways that defied all prediction. A careful lean, a shared glance, a gentle vibration that seemed to say, without sound, "I am here, and I am choosing you." Even when danger passed through the station, cargo lifts failing, security systems glitching, other aliens acting violently or carelessly, the creature moved not blindly or out of instinct, but in coordination with the human, covering his steps, shielding him with limbs that had once been useless, acting not as a tool, not as property, but as a being who had learned the meaning of choice, of loyalty, of family. Nights were the most intimate, the hum of engines, the flicker of neon through observation windows, the coldness of metal beneath them, all faded as the human spoke softly, recounting not strategy or efficiency, but stories of kindness, courage, hope, and perseverance. And the creature, lying close, limbs wrapped in a posture of trust, would sometimes nuzzle, sometimes tap, sometimes produce soft vibrations that resonated in the human's chest, a quiet confirmation that the bond had become mutual, a recognition that went beyond obedience, beyond survival, beyond expectation. And as months continued, the transformation was unmistakable. The creature's strength returned, coordination emerged, reflexes sharpened, but beyond the physical, something far more profound had changed. It had begun to choose, to anticipate, to respond in ways that were not programmed, dictated, or coerced, but chosen, deliberate, meaningful. The station's aliens continued to scoff, some out of ignorance, some out of fear, all out of their inability to grasp that life could be valuable for reasons other than profit or utility, and they did not see the small repeated acts that truly defined progress, the quiet touch, the soft word, the refusal to abandon when it would have been easy, the unwavering insistence that healing required time and empathy, not calculations. And through this, the human's patience never wavered. His presence remained constant, unhurried, methodical in its constancy, unwavering even when progress was slow or setbacks occurred, even when the creature recoiled from pain, even when scars reopened or joints stiffened, even when the station's whispers turned into open ridicule, even when the alien's eyes were filled with doubt, calculation, and judgment. Slowly, with every small success, the creature began to assert small acts of agency, a limb extended to meet the human's hand without prompting, a head pressed against his shoulder spontaneously, eyes tracking his movements and adjusting its own body accordingly, a subtle vibration that was not a reflex, but a signal, a communication, a choice. The alien observers could not interpret these signals correctly. They had no framework for a being that could respond through loyalty and affection, that could act without immediate reward or coercion, that could choose family over profit, empathy over expedience. and the human, quiet and consistent, continued to nurture this growth, teaching the creature not through orders but through example, showing the station and its inhabitants that the slow accumulation of care, the persistent insistence that life is valuable for its own sake, could yield strength, loyalty, and intelligence that no formula could predict. The creature, once derided as broken, began to walk with purpose, limbs strong beneath its weight, muscles coordinated, senses alert, responding to the human's presence with anticipation rather than fear. And in moments when the aliens attempted to intervene, offering mechanical stimulants, mechanical exosuits, or experimental enhancements, insisting that the creature could recover faster if only it were treated efficiently, rationally, scientifically. The human refused each time, a calm defiance in his eyes that spoke of conviction beyond reasoning. The station's usual rhythm was shattered the moment the corporate vessels arrived, their sleek hulls cutting through space with predatory precision, their engines humming with authority and wealth, and the crew inside radiating the same cold efficiency that had discarded the creature months earlier, as if ownership alone granted them the right to dictate life, as if contract and credit outweighed choice and trust. The human and the creature sensed it long before the official communication arrived, the subtle vibrations in the station, the air thickening with calculated intent, the clatter of footsteps heavier, more purposeful, as if the corridor itself had learned to anticipate confrontation. The human stood beside the creature, hand resting lightly on one fractured limb that had long since regained its strength, eyes steady, voice calm, expression unyielding, while the creature shifted subtly, coiling its multiple limbs not in fear but in alertness, muscles rippling beneath scarred skin, eyes tracking every movement of approaching emissaries with clarity, awareness, and a growing sense of choice that no ledger, no contract, no alien authority could override. The communication arrived, a holographic projection of corporate officials, their faces sharp, unfeeling, teeth bared in what they believed was intimidation, voices dripping with the cold logic of commerce, offering wealth, enhancements, and even threats, claiming that the creature belonged to them, that any bond formed with a human was irrelevant, that their contract entitled them to obedience, efficiency, and immediate return on investment, and that refusal would have consequences. The human said nothing, allowing the creature to hear, to process, to decide, his presence a quiet affirmation of safety and constancy, the only variable the alien authorities had not accounted for, choice. The creature's body shifted, limbs flexing with power regained through months of patience and care, tail coiling with precision, claws scraping lightly against the floor, eyes narrowing not in fear but in assessment, a spark of recognition and decision igniting within, and the station seemed to hold its breath, the hum of engines and chatter of commerce fading into the background as something far older, more primal and profoundly human unfolded before the corporate eyes, the act of choosing family, of asserting loyalty, of defining worth beyond ownership. And then it moved. Limbs that had once been useless now flexed with grace and power, claws pressing into the floor as it stepped forward, head high, eyes fixed on the human, signaling with every subtle movement that its allegiance was not for sale, that loyalty could not be bought, that it had learned the ultimate lesson of humanity's strength, that love, care, and patience forge bonds stronger than fear, profit, or intimidation. The corporate emissaries recoiled, shocked by a response they could not anticipate, unable to interpret the simple defiance that radiated from a being they had once considered property. And when they extended mechanical devices meant to subdue, stimulants meant to coerce, and threats meant to intimidate, the creature responded with subtle but undeniable force, a movement so deliberate it made clear this was no instinct, no reflex, but a conscious decision, and it pressed closer to the human, protective, sovereign, unyielding, a silent declaration that it would not be taken, would not be commanded, and would not be sold.
Tension in the station became palpable, an electric hum that vibrated through metal walls and floors, filling corridors with anticipation, fear, and awe, as the aliens realized that no contract, no computation, no authority could break the bond that had formed through months of unhurried, patient, loving care, and that the very idea of control over a being with a mind capable of choice was a fantasy they had never confronted. The humans' calm presence reinforced the message. No panic, no pleading, no attempt to bargain, simply unwavering attention, a steady hand, and eyes that conveyed absolute trust, allowing the creature to act, to decide, to assert its own will, a will informed by experience, recognition, and the profound lessons of care, empathy, and connection. The corporate voices faltered, their logic unable to translate to a reality in which life had intrinsic value beyond profit, and the creature, fully recovered in body and spirit, leaned into the human, pressing its forehead to his chest in a gesture of choice, of recognition, of unshakable loyalty, a simple act that carried more weight than any contract, any ledger, any threat could ever hope to convey. And then, slowly, deliberately, the human spoke, not to the corporate emissaries, not to command the creature, but in quiet narration that only the creature could understand, words steeped in the months of shared struggle. You are free. You choose. You decide. And the creature, a being once shattered, once discarded, now sovereign, responded with movements that were deliberate, powerful, and profound, limbs extended not in aggression but in assertion, claws pressing to the floor as if to anchor itself to the station, head tilting in acknowledgement of the human's presence, eyes glimmering with comprehension, body language radiating the simple yet monumental truth that it had chosen, that choice could not be coerced, that loyalty and family were not commodities but bonds forged through patience, care, and love. The corporate emissaries retreated, their calculations useless, their assumptions shattered, their authority impotent against the quiet but unyielding proof of humanity's strength, and as the vessels departed, the station exhaled a collective, silent acknowledgement that the rules of value, ownership, and obedience had been rewritten not through force, not through wealth, not through intimidation, but through the patient, relentless insistence that life, even fractured and discarded, could thrive when treated with respect, care, and love. And in the quiet aftermath, the human and the creature moved through the station not as property and keeper, not as subordinate and superior, but as companions, partners, family, sharing gestures, touches, glances, soft vibrations of trust and recognition, the hum of engines, the flicker of lights, and the faint sounds of distant stars, all framing a tableau of quiet triumph that no alien calculation could ever replicate. Nights became moments of reflection, of continued connection, of quiet celebration of the bond forged in adversity, where stories were read, where soft sounds carried across limbs and skin, where the world outside could roar and threaten, but the bond inside between human and creature remained untouchable, sovereign, real, living. And slowly the station itself seemed to recognize a new truth, that the value of life was not measured in credits, contracts, or utility, but in care, patience, persistence, and the quiet willingness to endure with one another, through pain, through fear, through uncertainty, until what was once broken could rise, strong and whole, and choose freely whom to follow, whom to trust, whom to call family. The human's eyes, steady and calm, reflected the knowledge that he had witnessed, nurtured, and participated in something extraordinary, that life, even when discarded, could flourish through devotion, that the patience of a single heart could awaken strength in another, that compassion was more powerful than coercion, and that loyalty, earned rather than commanded, was a force the universe itself could not predict or control. And the creature, massive, multi-limbed, scarred but whole, coiled around the human not out of fear or obligation, but out of recognition, respect, and choice, every motion deliberate, every breath a testament to the months of care, every vibration a quiet affirmation that family, in the truest sense, had been forged, unshakable, unpurchasable, undeniable. Through the station, the corridors, the hum of engines, the distant glimmer of stars, a simple, profound lesson had been written in motion, in touch, in choice, that humanity's strength lies not in conquest, not in efficiency, not in fear, but in patience, compassion, and the unwavering belief that even what the universe discards can be made whole, can choose freely, and can define its own worth. And so the human and the creature moved forward together, a living testament to the quiet, relentless, beautiful power of care, trust, and the bonds that make life more than survival. Proof that humanity, in its most essential form, had taught even the coldest, most utilitarian of worlds a lesson they could never compute, that love is strength, patience is power, and loyalty, once earned, can never be bought.